Welcome back to teachingorchestra.com. We're back here in the teaching lab and I have some students with me today. And today we're going to learn how to tune chords. Tuning harmonies is much easier than tuning everything in unison. And some of the exercises that we've been doing are tuning the unisons, which is actually very difficult to hear. Harmonies are much easier to hear. And if you're doing things like scales, you can play scales in thirds, not just each individual person playing scales in thirds, but you can have like your low strings start the scale and then the high strings come in 2 notes later to play in thirds, and that just makes everything a lot easier to tune to. Again, playing things in unison are very difficult to tune. So let's say you're performing a piece of music and you get to a certain chord and it's out of tune. And a lot of the times where we have intonation problems in our concert music, it's because of the orchestration. A lot of times the composers doubled the third, or we're in a weird inversion, or something is going on that's non-traditional and it's hard for the students to hear and be able to play in tune. The reason why we don't double the third of the chord is because it is a tendency tone, and if we're using a Pythagorean tuning system, they're going to have to lower that third. And if there's a seventh in the chord, we're going to have to lower it even more, and it's really going to mess things up as far as the physics go. But don't worry about the physics, and it's not important for the students to worry about the physics because they can hear where it's supposed to sound, they can hear where it lines up, and we're going to demonstrate that today by learning how to tune a chord. So we're going to start with a D major triad. And let's say we've gone through this piece of music and it's just not working out the way it's supposed to go. No, I'm sorry, let's do a G major triad. We're going to do a G major triad. Let's say, we're going through this piece of music, we get to this G major triad, it's horribly out of tune, we need to fix it, okay? The first thing that we want to do is get the root in tune. So you're going to look at your students and you're going to say, all right, so who has the root, okay? Who has the G? All right, play if you have the root of the chord. Ready, go. In tune. So whoever has the lowest sounding note, we call that the bass. Even if they're not in the bass section, we don't have any bass players today, but we have a cello. So let's say Ethan's out of tune. We got to get that in tune first because everything is going to build off of the lowest sounding pitch. So Ethan's doing a good job playing in tune. Everybody else is doing a good job matching. So now we're going to add a chord tone. We're going to add the fifth next because the fifth is the closest to the equal temperament pitch to tune. And so once we get the root in tune, we can add the fifth. And we'll see how this goes. So, all right, here's root. Ready to go. Fifth. Good. Third. Good. The third, except for the seventh, is going to be the hardest note to play in tune because we have to adjust to be able to get to our correct temperament to make it sound in tune. Now, one thing we can do is we can sing the note to the students before they play so that they can hear what it's supposed to sound like. We can also have them sing the note too so that they develop that process of audiation where they are coming up with the pitch in their head before they play it on their instruments instead of just putting down a finger and see what comes out, which we don't want our students to get in the habit of. We want them into level 3 tuning where they're anticipating the tuning. Okay, so once we get the root in tune, we add the fifth, and then the third is probably going to be the trickiest note to tune. That's why in orchestration, if our third is doubled someplace, or if there's a lot of third in the orchestration, those chords tend to be the most out of tune in the music. You'll also notice that right now, we're playing with senza vibrato, so no vibrato right now for our students. Everybody's playing with straight tone because the vibrato will affect the pitch, and we want to get the core pitch first and then add vibrato to it later in context, okay? So now we're going to say, okay, we're going to switch this to a 7th chord. No longer a triad, now it's a 7th chord. Now we have to deal with an even more difficult note to tune, which is the chord 7th. We're going to do it the exact same way, and we're going to leave the hardest notes to tune last so that we have a good foundation of tuning first, and then we put in the other notes next, okay? So let's do G7. We're going to do a major minor 7th chord or a dominant 7th chord, however your theory textbook likes to call these notes. So let's have the root G. good to have him, listen to it, make sure that he can internalize and play it. If we have to, we can get in there and we can move his finger around until he can hear where it's supposed to be. And at times it can sound different under the ear than it can sound to you in context. And I also find a weird phenomenon in some orchestra rooms is depending upon what part of the room I'm in, the way the sound, the way the acoustics are in the room, I can hear beats in the sound that aren't really there, so it kind of sounds out of tune and maybe it isn't, or maybe something sounds in tune where it's not, or I get the pitches confused. So that's a weird thing that has to do with physics. So what are beats? Beats are, like noise-canceling headphones, right? They have microphones built into them, so they hear the noise coming in from the background, and they shoot the opposite sound wave in the direction so that those sound waves cancel out. So what's happening in tuning, when we're out of tune, is we have these waveforms that are going, and they're close to the same rate. Well, one's a little faster and one's a little slower, and at certain points they're going to be opposite of one another, and so we have acoustically reduced amplitude, meaning that the sound is softened because of that cancellation. So we hear like wah 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 in the sound, and sometimes, depending upon where you are in the room, you'll hear those cancellations differently, and that can affect you as an orchestra director. So make sure that you're being cognizant of that. Anyway, that's our basic fundamentals of tuning harmonies. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but make sure that you get your harmonies in tune before you go on if you want to establish a culture of tuning for your ensemble.